Hello, I'm Volko Ruhnke, creator of GMT Games' Levy Campaign Series that showcases medieval military operations. Volume 2 in the series, Almoravid, is set in the Iberian Peninsula and focuses in on two critical years in the long process known in the West as the Reconquista. In the year 1085, the Christian kingdom of Leon conquered a broad swath of Muslim territory at the heart of the peninsula. And in 1086, the Muslims responded by forming a giant army that defeated the Christians at the Great Battle of Sagrajas, or Zalaca. The game's researcher Albert Alegrejove and I realized that to properly examine these military campaigns, we needed also to provide their political context, especially the complex affairs between Muslim and Christian states in that day. We call these features of the game Taifa politics, and it's those features that I would like to show you now. In the 11th century, Muslim Hispania fragmented into multiple small kingdoms or emirates, known as the Taifa states, a derisive reference to their petty squabbling amongst themselves. Typically in that century, the Christian kingdoms of the north had been similarly divided, and the fighting was as likely to be Christian on Christian or Muslim on Muslim as it was one religion against the other. However, in the year 1085, a unified kingdom of Leon under Alfonso VI succeeded in conquering the large central Taifa emirate of Toledo. And this stab at the heart of Al-Andalus unified the Taifas and spurred them to call in a powerful counterforce, the Almoravidun, or Almoravids, a fundamentalist movement that had forged a vast West African empire and was now ready to intervene in force against the Christians in Hispania. The Almoravids not only checked Alfonso of Leon's advance into Al-Andalus, they eventually conquered the Taifa states and forged a new Almoravid empire in Spain. It is the first military campaigns of this pivot in the 11th century from fragmented Taifa states to unified Muslim resistance against the Reconquista that is the topic of our game. Let's have a closer look at how the game Almoravid simulates these Taifa politics and how they relate to the military campaigns. You see here Christian kingdoms in the north and Muslim Taifa states in the south. If you know Volume 1 of the Levy Campaign Series, the game NEVSKY, you'll recall that the left side of the map is Teutonic. It's always friendly to the Teuton side. And the right side of the map, Rus, is always friendly to the Russians and enemy to the Teutons. It's a little more complicated here in Almoravid, Volume 2. The Christian kingdoms, in yellow, are always friendly to the Christians, but each Taifa state, in green, has its own status of friendly, enemy, or neutral. And so we'll keep track of that with a marker within each border. So for example, if we look at Zaragoza, we see that the Lord of Zaragoza, the Emir, Mustaine II, is mustered at his main city of Zaragoza. His army is in the field and he's resisting the Christians. In this situation, Zaragoza is independent. It is friendly to the Muslim side, including all its strongholds. It's enemy to the Christians. But if Mustaine, the Taifa lord, were for some reason to disband, the status of Zaragoza would change. Not only would Mustaine and his army leave the map and go home, but Zaragoza would now be a parias state. We would mark the independent box with a parias marker, which would award the Christians one victory point and would render all of the territory and strongholds in the Zaragoza territory, in the Zaragoza Taifa, neutral to both sides. What's happening here is that the Emir has reached an arrangement with the Christians and is paying them tribute, known as parias. But let's imagine instead that Musta'in were still in the field. He's resisting the Christians, and therefore Zaragoza is still enemy. Let's say Musta'in has gone somewhere else and the Christians are invading and attacking the city. If the city were neutral, they would simply pass through. There would be no conquering it. The emir has reached an arrangement with the Christians and they're banned from attacking them. But if Zaragoza is hostile and the Christians were to conquer it, then something else would happen again. Zaragoza would be conquered for victory points, and because it is a Reconquista target, as shown by the red cross symbol by the city, the whole Taifa state, the emirate, would become Reconquista status, meaning that the Christians would receive not only the victory points for conquering the city, but also 3 victory points for having created a Reconquista territory, essentially annexing it to the Christian kingdoms. The territory of Zaragoza would now be friendly to the Christians, including all of the strongholds, and enemy to the Muslims. And while this might seem a bit complicated, don't worry, there is a play aid that handily summarizes all of these statuses, what they mean, and how you get from one to the other. And in this way, Almoravid simulates the dynamic relationships between each of the separate of these patchwork Taifa states with the Christian Reconquista fighting. I'd like to say a little bit more about this term parias that we use for the neutral status of a Taifa state. Where does that come from? Parias was the term for a tribute, typically in gold dinars, from a Taifa lord to a Christian king. And originally, the point of the parias payment was to, in effect, hire that king to provide military service as needed to the Taifa lord. The reason for that arrangement is that the Taifas were quite wealthy. They had Mediterranean trade and access to gold in Western Africa, while the Christians were less wealthy but had a strong warrior culture with hard-fighting knights in mountainous kingdoms. And so the Christians were essentially hiring themselves out as mercenaries to the Muslims. By the 1080s, with the unified Kingdom of Leon under Alfonso VI, the Christians had become so expansive and dangerous that the parias system evolved somewhat into having the principal consequence that the Muslims needed to pay the parias tribute just to prevent the Christian kings from attacking them and taking their territory. A bit of a protection racket, kind of like a mobster in local businesses, if you will. And so in our game, parias means that that particular emir, that Taifa lord, is still in charge, but is paying off the Christians not to attack him. So if we look at how this works in practice, Taifa lords actually have a couple of special additional aspects that revolve around their status as potentially parias tribute payers of Christians. So on the reference sheet for Taifa politics, we see the banners of 6 Taifa lords. We also can see them on this orientation map at either side. One for each Taifa except for Toledo, which at this point was ruled initially by a Taifa lord, Al-Qadir, who's so weak that he doesn't even merit a marker in the game. You'll get to know these Taifa lords quite well when you play. Let's look at Al-Musta'in on the right here. He's got his little Taifa lord symbol, and he's ruling the Taifa of Zaragoza. First off, the Christians can actually try to force him to disband by ravaging his territory. Every odd ravage marker that they place in his territory will shift his service marker on the calendar, as we see here on the left, by 1 box. That's essentially they are pressuring him with these raids into backing down and going ahead and paying the parias payment. When he does disband, not only will his territory go neutral as a parias Taifa state, but he actually will make a parias payment in the game. and that payment will be coin equal to his service. At the upper right of his mat, we see that his service is 4, his service length. We see the same thing on his service marker. If he were to disband, not only would his territory become a parias neutral Taifa, but the Christians would get to divide up 4 coin for 4 service among their lords. For example, they could give 4 coin here to Alfonso. And so you can see that these considerations of parias payments and Taifa politics will help drive the two sides' military strategy in the game in terms of either trying to keep the Taifa lords in the field against the Christians, or the Christians trying to get them to disband and pay the gold dinars. We've talked quite a bit about what the Christians are trying to do and how they can do it, but what about the Muslim side in the game? What can the Muslims do to resist this Christian onslaught? Well, one thing that they can do is make use of what became complicated politics within any Taifa that came under Christian pressure. Just because Alfonso VI had conquered the Taifa of Toledo by taking its key city, Toledo, and kicking out the emir there, did not mean that he had immediately consolidated control over all the Muslim populations. This was a time in which the Muslims were reacting to this Christian expansion by a call to jihad, or religious warfare against the Christians. And we show that in the game with jihad markers that can appear on any strongholds that are within a Reconquista or Parias Taifa. And you'll see on the victory track to the left that as we add jihad markers, the Muslim score is going up. Each jihad marker, like the similarly sized ravaged markers, is worth 1/2 victory point. Similarly, in a Parias Taifa, it might be that the Taifa is ruled by an emir, but if he is in league with the Christians by paying parias, he may suffer rebellions and resistance by his Muslim subjects because he's not doing enough to defend Islam. And so these strongholds can receive jihad markers as well. The jihad markers have not only the effect of giving victory points to the Muslims, but they also render any stronghold with them automatically friendly to the Muslims and hostile or enemy to the Christians, regardless of the Taifa status. The Muslims can place them by conquering these strongholds, by events, and by capabilities, particularly once the fundamentalist Almoravids land, because their capabilities and events lead to a particular stirring for jihad in the peninsula. All this may sound a bit complicated, but the transitions are not that frequent during actual play, and the aid sheet will take you through each step. Together, these Taifa politics underlaying the Levy Campaign military system open up the full historical possibilities for muster and disband of lords, raids and conquest, special events and capabilities, all amidst the political patchwork intrigue of Reconquista era Hispania. I hope that you will enjoy the game.